The thunder struck so close it rattled the bones of the world. For a moment, the plains held their breath, then the sky opened wide and poured its grief upon the earth. Rain drummed the roof of the cabin like impatient fingers, hard and relentless, turning the dirt outside to blackened glass. Inside, Daniel Wyatt sat alone by a dim fire, the heat licking his boots while smoke curled toward the rafters. His hands rested idle on his knees. He had the look of a man who once believed in something, but whatever it was had long since ridden off and never come back. He told himself he liked the silence, but that wasn't true. The silence was only a mirror that showed him everything he'd lost. His brother, the land that dried beneath his care, the sound of laughter that used to live here. The whiskey on the table was low, but he let it be. There was no comfort left in it tonight. The storm pressed harder against the walls, a living thing made of wind and water. He could feel it breathing through the cracks. Somewhere out there, coyotes howled and the horses stirred uneasily in the shed. Then came a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a knock, faint but certain. Once. Then again. A third. Slower. He frowned, stood, and reached for the rifle leaning by the hearth, though something inside him already knew this wasn't danger. It was something stranger, something that carried the shape of memory. When he opened the door, the wind nearly tore it from his hand. She stood there, dark hair plastered to her skin, rain shining on her face like tears the sky had lent her. A woven white dress clung to her frame, bright patterns bleeding color in the downpour. Her eyes met his without fear, though the cold had turned her lips pale. "I need you," she said, her voice steady but trembling at its edges, like the world had given her only that one sentence to survive on. Daniel's breath caught. He knew her, had seen her in town, buying flour and medicine, always alone. Folks whispered she'd lost her husband to the spring floods, that she'd kept to herself since. He'd nodded to her once, offered a polite word, nothing more. Now she was here, in the storm, saying she needed him. He hesitated, every muscle torn between decency and the ghosts of his own fear. The world he lived in had sharp rules, men kept to their own, and kindness toward her kind drew trouble. But there was something in her eyes, something too human to turn away from. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Her breath came out in mist. "There's a boy hurt. The river took his mother. He's all I have left to save." The rain roared, filling the silence between them. He looked past her shoulder into the darkness. No horse, no wagon, only the endless wet night. She must have walked miles. He could have stepped aside, let her in. He almost did. But the part of him that remembered every time mercy cost him more than pride held him back. "You shouldn't be here," he said, and the words came colder than he meant. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't plead. "There's no one else." Daniel swallowed. Lightning flashed across the plains, revealing her figure in silver light, strong, shaking, defiant. She looked less like someone seeking help and more like someone daring him to be human. For a heartbeat, he thought he might be. Then he stepped back, and the door came between them. The wood caught the echo of his cowardice. He pressed his hand to the frame, waiting for her to knock again, but the sound never came. Outside, the storm swallowed her footsteps as she turned away. Inside, the fire popped and spat, sending sparks into the room's dim air. Daniel set the rifle aside and sat again, elbows on his knees, palms to his face. He told himself he had no choice. That she'd find someone better. That the storm would pass. But the rain didn't ease. It fell harder, like the sky itself mourned the moment he let mercy slip through his fingers. He thought he heard her voice once more. A soft echo carried on the wind, but it was only the storm, whispering what could have been. He rose, restless, moved to the window. The plains stretched black and endless, their surface rippling with water. Then lightning cleaved the sky, and in that single flash he saw her far off, a lone figure walking into the silver distance, dress whipping in the wind. Something inside him cracked open, quiet but final. The air smelled of wet earth and regret. He pressed his forehead to the cold glass, heart pounding with the truth he didn't want, He had turned away the one person who still believed he could matter. Thunder rolled low across the valley, long and sorrowful, like the earth itself had witnessed the choice. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to unhear it, but the sound stayed, heavy as guilt. And then, faintly, impossibly, he thought he saw another flicker of light beyond the trees. A lantern's glow, moving away from him. His pulse quickened, uncertain whether it was hope or warning. He couldn't tell if she carried it, or if something else waited for him out there in the dark. He whispered her name, though he'd never spoken it before. The storm swallowed it whole. And for the first time in years, Daniel Wyatt felt the kind of fear that doesn't come from danger, but from knowing the story isn't done yet. The morning after the storm carried a silence too loud to bear. The world smelled of wet earth and regret. Daniel Wyatt woke to the sound of wind scraping the eaves, a hollow, mournful tune that reminded him of the knock that wouldn't leave his head. He hadn't slept. He'd only sat by the ashes of his fire, replaying her voice over and over. "I need you." It came to him between breaths, between heartbeats, as if her words had taken root inside his chest and refused to die. He tried to tell himself she was fine, that someone else had found her. But the truth was a steady ache. He didn't know, and the not knowing was eating him alive. By midday, he stepped outside. The plains were heavy with fog, the air thick with ghosts. Every puddle reflected the gray sky like an open wound. His horse pawed the mud, restless, as though feeling the same unease crawling through him. He poured a measure of water into his hands and rubbed it over his face, hoping the cold would wake something clean in him. It didn't. The shame stayed. Days slipped past like weary cattle. The rain eased, but it left behind a landscape stripped of color. Daniel kept to himself, mending fences that didn't need mending, chopping wood for a fire that barely burned. Each swing of the axe was a punishment he gave himself for what he hadn't done. People in town whispered that a woman had been seen near the river bend, carrying a wounded child. Some said she was headed east, some said she vanished into the woods. None of it mattered. What mattered was the way his hands trembled every time he thought of her walking into the dark because he hadn't opened his door. On the fifth evening, when the sun bled out behind the ridge, he saddled his horse. No plan, no words left. Just the pull of something that felt like penance. The path was soft and unsteady, the air heavy with the promise of more rain. He rode until the stars came, until the silence pressed against his ears like cotton. Then, through the whisper of the river, he heard a faint cry, a child's, thin and ragged. He followed it through the reeds. She was there, kneeling by a small fire under a slant of stone, her hair tangled, dress torn, hands trembling as she pressed a cloth to the boy's leg. The child's face was pale with fever, but he breathed. When she looked up, her eyes found him without surprise, as if she'd known he would come. He dismounted and went to her slowly, his boots sinking into the mud. "You found him," he said, his voice low, unsure whether it was guilt or awe that roughened it. "I never stopped looking," she whispered. Her hands didn't pause in their work. "You shouldn't be here." He almost laughed at that. Soft, broken. "No, I shouldn't. But I am." For a long moment, the rain between them was the only sound. Then he knelt beside her, reaching for the cloth she held. Their fingers brushed, a spark small but real. Together, they bound the wound, fed the boy sips of water, built the fire higher. The air smelled of damp wood and second chances. When the boy finally drifted into sleep, she looked at Daniel fully for the first time. There was no anger left in her, only exhaustion carved deep into her face. "You closed the door," she said quietly. He nodded, shame swallowing the words before they could rise. "I was afraid. Of me. Of what you'd make me remember." She studied him, the firelight soft on her skin. "And what do you remember now?" He met her gaze, the truth sitting heavy but clean. "That I used to be someone worth helping." Something in her broke then, not into pieces but open. A single tear slid down her cheek, caught in the flicker of flame. "Then help me now," she said. He reached out and took her hand, not as apology, but as a promise. The storm began again, gentle this time, rain falling in rhythm with their breathing. The boy stirred and sighed, his small chest rising steady. Daniel looked toward the horizon, where distant lightning walked the sky. The night no longer felt endless. It felt alive, fragile, waiting. He didn't know what morning would bring, or if the town would turn its back on them both. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. He pressed her hand once more and whispered, almost to himself, "I heard your knock too late." She shook her head. "No. Just in time." The thunder rolled again, low, distant, like the world itself drawing breath. Daniel turned toward the sound, heart steadying, eyes narrowing at something moving in the far dark. A light, small, unsteady, flickered through the trees. Another lantern, swaying, coming closer. He rose slowly, every instinct on edge, the echo of the storm humming through his blood. Whatever was out there, it was coming for them. He stepped forward into the rain, leaving the warmth of the fire behind. And for the first time, he didn't close the door.